planting into dry conditions is something that many of the producers in the area are experiencing this year. Because of that, you might be wondering when is the best time to begin irrigation, or if you should even run the pivot before planting. My colleague Alex Makovicka looked in that particular topic with Extension Educator Steve Melvin.
It's already proven to be a very dry spring, so a lot of producers are thinking about what they're going to have to do this upcoming year to get those crops growing. Joining us now is Steve Melvin, Nebraska Extension Educator. Right now, what do producers need to be focusing on? I guess 30,000-foot perspective.
You know, we've had some guys with this real dry spring think that maybe they need to irrigate before they run the planter, maybe even pre-irrigate some. And typically in Nebraska, we don't think that is a wise practice. However, if the planter isn't working well, you can't get it in the ground, you're just not, if it's too cloddy or hard, or maybe sometimes it's just too fluffy a soil. Sometimes it makes some sense to run the to run the irrigation system before we do the planter, just so the planter works better. But in general, we can usually get in the field and make it work without irrigation, and then maybe, do some irrigation after we plant.
As we have this conversation, hopefully we're past the point of those freezing threats, but if that should happen, what do we need to be thinking about?
Yeah, it's always recommended that if your temperature is going to drop below 40 degrees, and always keep in mind that low areas, in a draw or like a creek valley or something or another, is always colder than it is up on top, and sometimes we can get a pivot iced up, and of course if it gets enough ice, it'll take it down. So if it's below 40 degrees, you really want to keep a close eye on it. It may or may not until it gets to 32, but sometimes with low dew points, we can ice a pivot up when it's above freezing.
Absolutely. Steve, you also mentioned herbicides come into this conversation. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, herbicides, a lot of people, is kind of a common practice for a lot of people to put their herbicide on after they plant and then run the center pivot. And a half inch is usually maybe 3/4 of an inch of water is good to incorporate the herbicide. Hopefully it rains, and we don't need to do that. I always encourage guys to think about running a pivot as plan B if it doesn't rain, but if it needs to be ran, it does. And it's also good to, get better seed to soil contact, get the seed watered, get everything to come up very uniformly. And there's some good reasons to do it, but there's a cost to it as well, and particularly if you're in an area with a water allocation, does that half inch of water is better spent another time of the year. So it's not just turn the pivot on and you leave the field with the planter. There's some good reasons to, but there's some good reasons not to as well.
So is there a way to monitor that application or anything like that?
Well, I think center pivots are like any other mechanical device. The sprinkler package can get bad on them. And so when you're running that irrigation early and you've got some bare soil out there, it's really easy to kind of drive along the pivot where it's just getting the soil wet and look for uniformity. Also, just look for the gleam in the water from the sun and look for a nice uniformity, a little less water at the pivot point, more as you go out. And it's just always good to do that, particularly early in the season when we're running it at planting. That way we have time to, correct something if there's a problem. But you can see a lot of problems if you just take a quick look at it, and it doesn't take very long to do it.
Absolutely. As you've been talking to producers across the state gearing up for planting and irrigation, what have you heard from folks?
Well, it's a dry spring, and some places the ground's really hard. It's been a cold spring as well, and some places they're having a little trouble getting the seed to the depth that they want it down to some good moisture, and that's certainly the reason we talk about maybe some irrigation this time of year and maybe not. So
absolutely. What else is important to add to this conversation that we missed?
Well, this spring being as dry as it is, sometimes with some, particularly with strip till, where you're putting that seed maybe right over some anhydrous. Some people will put down some anhydrous. There, we really need to watch for some root burn from that ammonia. And so there's another situation where you might end up needing to put some irrigation on to kind of minimize that problem. Also, if you're putting some dry urea on top, and it's been a week and it hasn't rained it in, you might want to think about that. If you're in a no-till situation, might be another time when you would think about putting on some irrigation. But in general, we don't like to irrigate Nebraska until we're getting into June or first part of July or something on corn, but it's plan B, and so if we need to irrigate, it's a good thing to do it.
Yep. welcome to Nebraska.
That's right.
All right, we talked about a lot of things for producers to consider. Is there a place to go to get more information?
Yeah, I always think, we've got some good articles in Crop Watch newsletter, and that's a good place to do it. Certainly they can call the local extension office and get some more information as well. So.
All right, appreciate the insight as always. Steve, thanks so much.
Thank you.